Hi, Sally Hoedel, author of the Destined series, which recently was announced will now include Destined to Give, the legendary generosity of Elvis Presley. So I am going to read the introduction to you, and I hope that it strikes some curiosity and some interest. So let's get started. Myth and misconceptions are woven into a commonly shared historical fabric over time. When this occurs, and it has since the beginning of time, myth and legend replace humanity, just as tall tales, and sometimes short ones, replace simple truths. Napoleon was not short. He was average in height for his time, standing at 5 feet 7 inches. Einstein never failed math. Marie Antoinette did not say, "Let them eat cake." George Washington never chopped down a cherry tree, at least not one worth recording in the logs of history for all time. Elvis Presley did not eat himself to death on peanut butter and banana sandwiches, and he never reached anything remotely near the often speculated weight of 350 pounds. He was also not a recluse, living some type of Howard Hughes existence. Of course, the greatest myth that seems to never die is that Elvis never died. Yet, according to historian Dan Snow, all historical figures have a contemporary reputation in which myth merges with real history. For Elvis Presley, truth seems as mystical as the Greek myths and as manipulated as Napoleon's height. An entire psychological complex was based on the inaccurate physical appearance of the French leader, and with Elvis Presley, an entire existence has been ingested, chewed up, and regurgitated so many times by so many people who knew him, and many who did not, that it is nearly impossible to reach the core of his humanity. Sadly, it was at that point of ingestion that an insignificant amount of goodness was lost. Images of jumpsuits, Graceland, and Sidebirds remained, while his good deeds and genuine care for his fellow man was displaced. At times of crisis, myths have their historical importance, said Winston Churchill. Perhaps they inspire, convince, or simply provide a clear message when a large segment of the public needs one. Historian Dan Snow said, "Might the truth be more dramatic and fascinating than the myth? Certainly, it is always more uncomfortable." Is the truth of Elvis Presley even that uncomfortable, though? A tale of a man who intentionally destroyed his life and career is more uncomfortable than the true story of how he fought hard to hold on to all of it. Elvis Presley's story is not just compounded by an uncomfortable truth for the sake of mythical, historic repurposing. It is, after all, a very human story of a rise and fall through great adversity and unprecedented achievement. However, for Elvis, the retelling of that rise and fall is compounded by what sells. Colonel Tom Parker seems to still be setting that standard from the other side of his earthly existence. It is also compounded by what an extraordinarily committed fan base wants to hear. It can be challenging to hold both the best and worst aspects of someone in tandem while not allowing one to overshadow the other. It is compounded by those who knew Elvis as they continue to jockey for position in his life, many even after their own deaths, as their offspring join the game to push a desired narrative. It is continually compounded by tabloid headlines still committed to shock in order to sell, without an ounce of reverence for the very real historical aspect of the man and his story. These headlines once appeared on newsstands at grocery store checkout aisles, but are now more commonly found in YouTube video headings. The snowball of legend began rolling down the hill for Elvis almost immediately when he was crowned the King of Rock and Roll in 1956. Between April and July of that year, several publications from Memphis to Texas used the moniker to describe the man who captured the nation's youth and had taken over the charts. Those journalists had no way of knowing that indefinite repercussions of the catchy nickname. Most likely, they assumed that both Elvis and the genre itself were a flash-in-the-pan phenomenon that would quickly fade. Thus, the accession to the throne was rather rapid, considering his first nationwide hit, Heartbreak Hotel, was released January 27, 1956. Elvis often said he was uncomfortable with the title both because of his religious beliefs and because he thought others were equally deserving. He must have also wondered why, considering he was crowned only a few short months after he initially took over the pop charts. There is little room to dispute the enormous proportion of myth and legend that was created when Elvis was crowned so early in his career. From that moment on, the historical aspect of Elvis's contributions as a man and an extraordinary artist was forever replaced with myths. In the beginning, perhaps the intent was to create that image so the public could embrace Elvis and the radical new sound he brought with him. As Churchill said, perhaps there was purpose in a moniker that would inevitably lend itself to Elvis becoming the biggest star before or since. The gold lame suit, fancy cars, expensive jewelry, and the house on the hill all added to the image, and over the years, as fame took its toll, the weight of the title became a burden. The crown further sank the humanity of Elvis Presley when it became the catalyst for the most haunting myth of all. Elvis was a glutton. Surely a king rules his kingdom and lives in abundance. This myth created the notion of excess, which many still believe was what ultimately killed him. There is some truth in the excess. Women, cars, fancy clothes, and expensive jewelry were indulgences. However, the bigger truth is found in what he gave away. Elvis was first and foremost a provider. He pulled his family out of poverty and took it upon himself to keep them there. The book, Destined to Die Young, restored the very human essence of Elvis by exploring his health issues. Those health problems, many of which were inherited, made him vulnerable, just as they do for any ordinary person. They were mostly kept secret, so the myth of Elvis, which existed when he was alive and some of which he created himself, could endure. He wanted to maintain the respect of a boss to those around him in his inner circle, and he wanted to consistently deliver a rock and roll image to his fans. Likewise, today, the entities involved in the ongoing promotion of Elvis Presley prefer sex, drugs, and rock and roll to that of an extremely ill man who was self-medicating. Having ailments in 9 of the 11 systems of the body is not sexy, and sex still sells, just as it always has. The health problems revealed what the myths and the public image were hiding. They told the truth about how Elvis's life was one not of self-destruction. Elvis's life from the moment he was born until the moment he died was a life of survival. He first survived through extreme poverty, followed by an unprecedented level of fame, and then dealt with health issues, many of which were inherited and out of his control. He did all of this while projecting the image his fan base expected and privately providing for an extraordinary number of friends and family members over more than 2 decades. The health thread intricately weaved throughout those aspects of his life. In poverty, Elvis's family could not afford the health care, even when he showed early signs of several inherited diseases and disorders. With fame, he could afford access to that health care, but what began as a solution eventually hurt and had unknown consequences. The illnesses, compounded first by poverty and lack of medical advancement, were then compounded by the toll of fame and touring. The health thread connected a series of lifestyle decisions which enabled Elvis Presley to continue being Elvis Presley, but not for as long as anyone would have hoped. When myth takes the place of man, how can one find the essence of him ever again? Is there more than one string to follow to that very essence? More importantly, will the truth feel uncomfortable once it is found, as the historian suggested? It did not feel uncomfortable with the publication of Destined to Die Young. It felt comforting, as the truth often does. Knowledge and understanding provide the peace that mystery and myth always make elusive. The truth of the medical analysis provided answers. All the aspects of Elvis's story that never quite made logical sense suddenly did, and by weaving the health thread throughout his life, everything looked different, and the proverbial dots connected because questions were finally answered. Destined to Give, the legendary generosity of Elvis Presley, will also weave a thread throughout his life story. Just as the health thread revealed how various illnesses led to lifestyle changes, the generosity thread will reveal how fame changed Elvis's connection to himself, his family, his friends, to strangers, and to the world. This book will examine how Elvis's natural inclination to be generous changed over time. In the final years, when fame had run its natural course against the core of humanity, even the generosity looked vastly different from how it started. It is indisputable that the music and artistic expression of Elvis Presley were very different in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. Each decade was so specifically entrenched in variations of sound, fashion, and performance. The generosity of Elvis Presley also manifested in unique ways in each decade. Examining those specific changes will provide yet another layer of truth that has long been buried, or at the very least set aside. Interestingly, this thread of generosity within his life story also connects all that he survived. As previously stated, Elvis's life is a story of survival through poverty, fame, and illness. This book explores the roots of that generosity, which was a learned behavior when he was on the receiving end during those early years of poverty in Tupelo. He witnessed a natural sense of giving, rooted in survival. It will weave throughout the experience of unprecedented fame. That very fame allowed Elvis Presley to be generous in ways he never could have imagined. However, fame taints everything that is real and tangible eventually. In poor health, Elvis's generosity hurt him in ways he did not realize, as he put the needs of his family, friends, and fans above those of his own. The aspect of survival will unexpectedly demonstrate that even generosity can be destructive at times. Fame inevitably became a prison for Elvis. Instead of trading cigarettes for favors, cars were handed out along with expensive jewelry. The loyalty may have been sincere, but fame demanded that it be proven repeatedly. Trust was hard to come by for Elvis. His last personal sense of humanity was felt when helping nameless faces in need. They expected nothing from him and were grateful for the unexpected kindness. Elvis never saw those nameless faces again. They would not be asking for more or hoping that sly comments would turn into gifts. Gifting a complete stranger a new car certainly seems like a tale of great myth, yet in the final years, those were the moments of Elvis's truest self-expression. The decent man behind the crown who just wanted to help people and have purpose. Elvis Presley had a strong moral compass, but it was difficult to follow while in the trenches of fame. At times, he lost sight of his true north and often found his way back through acts of generosity. In those moments of goodwill, he found purpose in his fame and purpose in his abundance. Elvis understood that he was adored based on appearance and talent, or image, as he once referred to it, but his moral compass represented who he truly was at the core. If he had been born without good looks, charm, talent, and rhythm, that very core would have been exactly the same. In his lifetime, there was often a battle for integrity and authenticity within his core being. The money blinded it. The fame distorted the reality of it. Expectations of those around him and expectations of the entire planet sometimes buried it. However, his values remained, and he was most visible, and were most visible, in the continuous acts of kindness and giving. It is fascinating that both aspects of health and generosity are extremely universal and very human, yet they have not been thoroughly explored before the Destined series. It is almost as if the public is more comfortable with the myth, or more likely it is simply all they know. The pop culture version of Elvis Presley and his history have been packaged and repackaged numerous times, usually staying in the safe, shallow waters of basic music history, and within the confines of an expected sex, drugs, and rock and roll narrative. This book is not a laundry list of every good deed Elvis Presley ever did. They were all commendable, without question. The king-like gifting of cars and jewelry is a thing of legend now, and permanently stamped on pop culture's limited view of Elvis the man. Those stories will be included, but only as a necessary illustration of how Elvis's natural inclination to give back, or perhaps even pay it forward, evolved through both the blessing and curse of fame, as well as the fortune that accompanied it. More importantly, this book examines the why of the matter. Why does Elvis give so much away? Why is he inclined to share what he has in such extreme ways over the years? Just as the intent of Destined to Die Young was not to list his drug interactions, but instead to answer the question of why he continued to turn to the prescription medications, the intent of Destined to Give, the legendary generosity of Elvis Presley, is to answer the question of what Elvis was trying to achieve through his unprecedented generosity. 3 tasks are asked of the reader going forward. There is no guessing required, no need to aimlessly search for what modern day refers to as Easter eggs hidden throughout the text. First, simply be willing to follow the thread of generosity and be open to what it lays bare upon the pages. The generosity of Elvis Presley evolved over time, and when Elvis first experienced wealth, it seemed rather simple and limited to a nice car for himself and a simple house for his parents. Fame warped reality over time, and that shifted the generosity, as it did so many other aspects of his life. Secondly, be willing to set aside the myth of Presley perfection. Elvis was not perfect. Fame manipulated his existence, and in turn he used manipulation at times to foster an environment to survive that fame. The incredible amount of giving allowed Elvis to hold tightly to the remaining shreds of a real-world reality. He was forced to live in an alternative universe of his own making, and sometimes the planets, and the people did not align. Thirdly, just as Destined to Die Young took a reverse look at Elvis's family tree, as many ailments were not known until after his death, Destined to Give takes a reverse look at the behavior of those around Elvis. This requires a patience in exploring the positive and negative impact of Elvis's natural inclination to share his experiences of fame and wealth. There was a Judas or two in his story, but they did not fully reveal themselves until after Elvis's death. The requirements of this author are intricately entangled with the task of the reader as well. Hemingway said that a writer must not just depict life or criticize it, but instead must find the feeling and thought in it. He said, "You can't do that without putting in the bad and the ugly, as well as what is beautiful. because if it is all beauty, you can't believe it. It is only possible by sharing both sides, 3 dimensions, and if possible, 4. By looking at Elvis first through the lens of his health issues and Destined to Die Young, and now through the lens of his generosity, understanding is found. Yet it is imperative that the good, the bad, and the ugly are all equally explored, even within such a feel-good topic as benevolence. Understanding, like journalistic integrity, is something so rarely given to Elvis Presley and the re-examination of his life story. However, it is in that understanding, even when the threads weave momentarily in an undesirable direction, that true beauty is found, because that is where humanity is found. Elvis gave so much of himself to the world during his lifetime. May this book root the collective memory of him in what was good and decent and pure. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that, and look forward to sharing the rest of Destined to Give, the legendary generosity of Elvis Presley, with you in the near future. Thank you.